Now you can start recording.
Yeah, go.
Hi. Hi. So welcome to Radio Sophia. Thanks for joining. My name is Shailendra Kumar. I'm a PhD student at IIM Calcutta. So the pandemic had changed many things in profound ways. But what I find most fascinating and fundamental to this change is how the zone of experiment and the zone of experience are merging together, coming closer now. So see how, as a society, we have accepted the emergency use approvals for partially, so to say, in a way, tested vaccines. So not only about vaccines and medicines, so there are so many things that are changing fast, and our acceptance uh, of experiments coming to the zone of experience is only becoming broader. So one of such things is workplaces and work and workplaces, how they have been changing. Uh, the McKinsey's and the Accenture and TCSs of the world have been talking about workplace and workplace uh, culture, innovation, changing for over a decade now. But it's only after that this pandemic that what was careful experiments done by some pioneers and some careful and tentative, I would say, adopters, and a large number of other firms and enterprises waiting in the wings before the fogs clear. Uh, we now see it as a part of our everyday experience. So the zone of experiment has very rapidly transformed into the zone of experience. So that explains why we are talking about this today in this session. We have with us Krish Ashok, Global Head of Digital Workplace TCS. Welcome, Chris. Chris not only brings a practitioner's view to this topic, but given his deep interest in culture and society, I believe that he will bring in new dimensions and talk about certain things which are less talked about when we, engage with this question of work and workplaces. Apart from being a corporate leader and a nerd, Chris is in love with kitchen and music. His book Masala Labs, published by Penguin India, is getting noticed. I hope, time permitting, he will also briefly talk about the book. So, Chris, thank you again for accepting our invitation. We have around 45 minutes for the talk, followed by, say, 10-15 minutes of Q&A. Or you may,
is it just me, or you seem to have frozen up just a bit? So is my voice clear?
Yes, it is audible.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So let me just share my screen, and I will talk for maybe about 40 minutes or so, and then we can get into Q&A. Yeah. Can you just, if you can enable screen share, that will be good.
Yeah, you can do it right now.
Yeah, it's all right. Thanks you. All right. Right. Okay. So this is a topic that I have personally been talking about for the last decade, but more interestingly, the last 1 year, this has become another term like innovation and so on, right? So everybody uses it, and nobody has any clue of exactly what it is. And if anything, I think the pandemic, as you put it rightly, has essentially made experiments essentially live in production, if you will, right? It has allowed for more experimentation. I think we've seen a massive, almost like an A/B testing simulation happen live in front of us across the thousands of companies that TCS works for, that TCS manages the workplace for, right? So we are uniquely positioned in that way to not only have 500,000 employees and therefore have to do this for ourselves, but at the same time, also play a significant role in every industry's reimagination, and the full spectrum, from the likes of, say, a financial services company who's saying, no, once the pandemic back, we'll all be back in the office, to companies that are saying, I think we'll permanently be hybrid. and will significantly be remote. So I think the opinions are quite wide and so on. So I've been with TCS for almost 22 years now, straight out of university, and my work kind of spans across the areas of employee experience, thinking about the future of work, but more practically also thinking about things like how do people collaborate, right? At the basic level, it's the technology of collaboration, which obviously has significantly upgraded itself from just email in the past to virtual workplaces, to virtual reality, to augmented reality, to video conferencing, and tools such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams and others that just make life a lot more easier for people to collaborate remotely and share knowledge, right? And obviously, I think the last 5 years of rise of the use of AI and automation and the intersection of AI and automation with human beings in the sense of how what actually, where does I can hear some construction noise. It'll be good if others unmute, please. Thank you. So the intersection of AI and automation with human productivity. What is the impact? The impact is quite evident in an industrial setting, in an actual plant. It's a little bit less evident when I talk about knowledge work, when I talk about certain kinds of roles that will entirely disappear. Like for example, in companies that manage content, there used to be a sizable business process operation focused simply on looking at images and being able to classify them, finding objects in images, saying or identifying products, right? We see this as this thing, but you can't run a retail or a consumer good industry without understanding, without doing this kind of simple image recognition. And now almost 100% of that image recognition is now automated. And in fact, the accuracy levels of machine learning algorithms image recognition far exceeds that of a human being, right? And does not need to be paid a salary or health insurance and so on. So there is on the one hand that. On the other hand, there is also this larger challenge of designing AI to actually augment human capabilities as opposed to simply be a replacement for a human being, and that's one of those areas that I look at. The other area is the area that kind of now falls under behavior sciences, and this has become very relevant in the last couple of years in using data to understand individual behaviors. We've always used data to understand customer behavior. This has always been, and all the rest of the sales and marketing and product design has always been shaped by customer behavior, and this is quite obvious, right? A little less understood beyond, I guess, the 100-year-old time and motion studies of how people were productive on a conveyor belt. The whole idea of behavior science from a knowledge worker standpoint is less well understood because the diversity of things that we do is huge. But at the same time, one of the things that we've recognized in the pandemic is that at the end of the day, a lot of things are actually common, right? Regardless of role in industry, we all need to do status meetings. We all need to do virtual meetings. We all need to agree on a scope. We all need to agree on how we sort of do an agile scrum to negotiate a minimum viable product and then go for it and so on. So there are actually as many commonalities as there are differences in that sense as well. So the idea here is that can I use behavior science to persuasively nudge employees to learn, to be innovative, to go up in their career, to reinvent themselves so that they are less obsolete as technology change hits them, and so on. So these are the sorts of areas that I've largely worked on in the context of TCS and for TCS customers. And outside of work, I play a few instruments, violin, cello, guitar, and so on, and I compose and perform heavy metal music in Sanskrit, and I've written a book on the science of Indian cooking, which again is essentially, as I said, so the whole idea of thinking about the science and the meta models of cooking, if you will, rather than think of recipes. So that's essentially what connects my day job and the book that I wrote is essentially that my book has algorithms for instead of recipes, right? So that's one among the many things. But let me kind of get into the whole future of work aspect, and I might kind of take a slightly historical approach because I recognize that as engineers and technologists, we have a very what you call solutionistic sort of mindset. There's a problem, let me fix it with technology. So you can see that with blockchain, right? Classic example of a solution in search of a problem. Yet to see anything actually significantly useful come out of it, but uses a tremendous amount of computing power and energy to actually run and so on. So I'm going to sort of step outside of that typical engineering mindset and slightly take a historical cultural approach to thinking about the workplace. So clearly, the last year has been, to say the least, disruptive, and one does not have to repeat the impact that it has had on healthcare and the tragedy of the lives lost and so on. And at the same time, particularly lesser appreciated aspects of this tragedy in terms of elder care suffering all over the world during the pandemic and so on. Retail and a traditional shopping experience is just completely getting impacted for most of the year and so on. The challenges of the world that we live in and the challenges of actually communicating to people. Now, you have imagine that we're living in a world where everyone has access to the sum of all human knowledge, okay, and so on. And yet, it is the hardest time to actually convince and communicate to people that taking a vaccine is a good thing. You still have like 40% of the US population not willing to get vaccinated, increasing amounts of vaccine hesitancy in India. Communicating to people is much harder in a world where there is more communication and so on. So it's a very unique time. The complete near destruction of the travel and hospitality industry, as we see. These are just some of the changes that we've seen. But what's fascinating is that we're also living in a very unique time when, and as I said, if I wanted to learn something, I've learned about 3 musical instruments by just watching YouTube. Okay? I have taught myself how to make iPhone apps by watching YouTube, right? So the net sum of all, so there's 100 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute, and 90% of all the data generated on Earth literally is happening in just the previous 2 years, right? So it's literally every 2 years, 90% of data is being generated, of all of data is being generated in just the previous 2 years, and so on. And again, and you can actually, so on a lighter note, the example of this Korean artist there is that he was the first guy whose video got 1 billion views, right? And it apparently broke YouTube's code, because they had used a short integer and they needed to use a long integer in order to have more memory to actually store the count. So that's the world we kind of live in, right? And this also therefore means that anything that you want, from carpentry to big data to machine learning, you can learn now in the comfort of your home, right? So this therefore changes, in some sense, our relationship and our understanding of what role therefore a university plays in the context of preparing someone for the workplace, right? So the reason I'm coming at it is that this has, and I can talk for TCS, and I'm sure this is happening elsewhere. This phenomenon has fundamentally changed how we think about hiring. Okay? We used to hire in the past from selected set of colleges, right? We used to say, no, we'll only hire from REC, IIT, a few places and so on. Then we expanded that pool because we needed more people, and there simply weren't enough people in these universities. And we said, right, I will empanel a set of universities, maybe 200 or so, and I'll grade them based on A, B, and C. And then if I hire someone from university from grade A, I'll pay them X salary, and then from B, I will pay this salary, and so on. So again, the idea was to say that I am letting, in some sense, I'm trusting the university and the quality of the university, and not the quality of the individual, right? I honestly don't care, right? So because I need to hire literally thousands of people. The joke used to be that TCS will go to a college, put a tent, and say trespassers will be recruited. So that's essentially the mechanism of how we thought about hiring historically, right? And now we have actually, in the last 2 years, and particularly during the pandemic, we've changed again. The change now being that we honestly don't care which university you came from, because honestly, we don't think the university matters. In that, if you can clear this entrance test, and then if you can pass this interview, you're in. I honestly don't care, and so on, because so this has actually opened up the prospective pool of people who can join a company like TCS in a huge variation of roles, from everyone from who's maybe doing a business process for, say, a financial services company, or doing some loan related approval process somewhere else, or doing some insurance underwriting for an insurance company, and so on, to actually doing product development and machine learning for, say, the top automotive companies, and so on. The spectrum of work is so huge that this now allows us, in some sense, to really just pick the people from wherever they are, right? So this is one interesting trend that I kind of see. Now, what is, again, interesting is that the other trend that's been happening over the last 4 or 5 years is that we've got to the point where kids are building iPhone apps. Okay? And this is not because kids are getting smarter. It's because technology is getting simpler and more democratized and more open. And in an interesting way, what's actually happening is that you can now A teenager can literally go use open source libraries, build a mobile app, put it on the app store, integrate payments, and then become a millionaire. Right now, the all of this has essentially meant that the ecosystem of technology has now become so simple. Right, this has some interesting implications for organizations, right, and interesting implications for IT itself. Right, is it that one, digital is now centrally core to almost every business, right? So the question is that should I outsource that to TCS or should I do it myself, right? And this is an important question. And to be honest, many companies are saying we need to do both. So if I'm a car company, right, let's take the classic example of Ford, right? Ford, amazingly enough, right, is having is not able to supply to the demand for cars because there's a shortage of chips, of computer chips, and every car now has computer chips. Okay, the tractor manufacturer John Deere, their CEO actually said in an interview that they have more software developers than mechanical engineers. Okay, because John Deere now is not in the business of selling a tractor; they are in the business of selling a machine that is cloud connected and uses machine intelligence to figure out when to harvest, when to drop the seeds, and uses all of that data, which again, which used to be in the farmer's head in terms of tacit knowledge, is now AI big data delivered from the cloud. Okay, so this is John Deere's and a subscription-based business model and so on. Right? So therefore, John Deere is now a software company. Now, so this is one implication. The other implication, obviously, is the fact that if technology is that dead simple, it also therefore means that this is not a specialized skill. The ability to understand digital, the ability to build technology, and I logically mean only software, because ultimately everything is now software, right? The growth in the last 4 or 5 years is that everything that used to be hardware has become commodity. All the behavior is now controlled by software, from cars to satellites, to centrifuges, to industrial machinery, to literally everything is now software. So that therefore means that every individual in any company is now expected to therefore have some adjacent knowledge in digital technologies, without which they cannot be hired, right? So you could be an expert underwriter, but if you don't understand digital technology, I don't want you. You could be an expert researcher in biochemistry, but if you can't use software, and by incidentally, he spoke, I think Shailendra spoke about the whole COVID vaccine and the speed with which we built it. The moment the genome was sequenced, which is again a software problem, literally a week after the genome was sequenced, software at companies use, Moderna and Pfizer and so on, had candidate drugs generated by software, and then they have to do the testing, right? So that is where we are now, right? So this is one, right? The other interesting change, obviously, and only accelerated by the pandemic, is the fact that pure play digital business models and companies that only build digital products, okay, are fundamentally different from companies that build non-digital products. So Fallout 4 is a video game that clocked $750 billion in revenue in the first 24 hours of its launch. Okay, now you think Toyota, let's take any old world industry. Who can make $750 million out of selling a product on day one? I mean, it's hard even for the iPhone to do it. Okay, that's how difficult it is for anyone with a physical product, right? Now, the interesting thing, because this is a pure play digital product that does not have any kind of tangible means of distribution, means that, so this therefore means the culture of the workplace that can produce this kind of non-linearity is very different from the traditional corporate structure that we inherited from the Industrial Revolution, right? So the structure of the company that we have today is a 150-year-old product, right? Born in the Industrial Revolution, born in the need to have a corporate office with knowledge workers and have a factory where you make things. And again, once the computer came, a lot of things that you would do manually kind of became automated in some sense within the office and so on. Many of the technologies that we actually use today, for example, like email, are actually simply electronic replicas of older physical analog systems, right? So that's why your send button on the email is an envelope. Most kids today don't know what an envelope is. They've grown up only purely digitally. The second thing is, if you want to send a copy to someone, it says carbon copy. Most people today don't understand what a carbon copy even is, or a blind carbon copy, because every term like inbox, outbox, carbon copy. Every one of those metaphors of email used to be how memos used to be sent between offices. There actually used to be an in tray and an out tray on people's desks. And somebody would actually physically come, take the stuff out of your out tray, see who they need to carbon copy, take the carbon copy, put it on their desk and so on. So there's literally human powered thing that we then digitized and so on. So the point I'm trying to make is that many companies, when they think about the future of the workplace, where they fail to see the problem is that many of their cultures and the way they adopt technologies are skeuomorphically biased to the past. When I say skeuomorphic, meaning email is just an example. Many of the ways in which we run an organization today are actually relics of the past. And the reason why smaller, more nimble, agile companies are able to do this. Now, at the end of the day, 25 people are able to build a video game that makes $750 million in revenue in a single day. Is not a rule that can apply to every product, right? And by the way, this product took like 3 years to build. How do you actually run a large company that has a tremendous amount of complexity and so on, and yet somehow figure out which of what I inherited from my old workplace I need to get rid of? And if there's one thing that the pandemic essentially accelerated the process of discovering what are the things that I need to get away from. So there is no reason for people to sit in physical meetings in the office all day. Okay? We do that when we are sitting at home, and now we hate it. Right now, TCS is on its way saying we need to reduce 30-minute meetings to 15 minutes. We need to give back more time to the employee to be more productive, because every day we are spending too much time in meetings and so on. There are many other aspects of the physical workplace that I'll talk about that I think there are opportunities to completely fix and change. Right. So this is one. So clearly, I think AI and automation is playing a massive role. These are actually robots in an Amazon warehouse that literally have replaced human beings, where they just carry entire shelves. The reason I again give this example is that warehouses used to be better organized because they were designed for human beings. So each category shelf used to be there, so it's easy for a human being to go get something, right? Basically, data scientists realized that if I have robots, actually it's inefficient to arrange things. It's actually efficient to keep them in a way of structured chaos, in the sense that if products bought at the same time are as far away as possible, then there are lesser chances of a traffic jam between these robots. So all iPads will not be in the same place. They'll actually be strategically placed far away so that the robots can get them quickly and so on. So this essentially means that somebody with 20 years of experience in retail warehousing cannot come up with a solution, because this is a solution by machines for machines. Okay. And I think that's a fundamental thinking about the new workplace, that there are things that you will design for humans, by humans for humans, and by machines for machines, and by machines for humans, and so on, and vice versa. And this distinction actually makes the new world actually a lot more complicated, and a new set of skills that we need to actually address it, right? The other thing obviously is, see, historically, health and safety meant you have to be safe as far as you're in the factory, as far as you're in the building. That's my responsibility. The moment you step outside that, I honestly don't care, right? Companies now literally have to worry about whether a guy sitting somewhere in the village working for TCS is vaccinated, whether his family is vaccinated, whether the people in his entire neighborhood are vaccinated, right? Every one of these things is now a concern of the company. And likewise, digital wellness has actually become a central element of focus for companies in a way that it was never before, right? Because what has now happened is that what used to be a work and life balance is now become a work-life continuum. Okay? Work-life continuum means that you are not at any given point of time in a hard boundary between work and life. You are living both together, right? And as a result of that, the company cannot say, I only care about the work part of what you do. The company has to now care about whether you have a small child and whether when that small child has, say, online classes that you may have to help out. You may have a nursing child. You may have a ill parent that you are looking at. As long as you have to come to the office, none of this was the company's concern. I mean, you figured that out. You've made the time. You arrange for whatever. If you're remote now company has to care and worry about a lot of these things. So this is now, I don't know what the right answer is, but clearly companies seem to be wanting to think about this a lot more, right? So this is number one, right? Clearly, I think a tremendous amount of experiences have now become, shall we say, contactless. Okay? Like, for example, in the new world, a new employee joins, right? He's onboarded to TCS. So he gets a notification on when he can go to the office, with appropriate social distancing. And there's a digital kiosk. He opens the kiosk. There's a QR code that allows him to open a kiosk. Then he takes the laptop that's already pre-configured with all the things that he needs. And he comes back home and he starts working and so on. So the idea of designing contactless experiences have become important tactically during the pandemic, but I suspect they will continue forward, right? So there are experiences where human touch is required. And there are experiences where, honestly speaking, I would rather do without human touch, even after the pandemic, right? And so this distinction of how we design the workplace is going to change. And there are many aspects of things like support and so on. I actually don't want a human touch at all. You have to enable me to solve my own problem, right? It's inefficient. I mean, I only have 2 engineers and they have to fix 100 laptops and I have to provide support. It's designed to be a bad experience in general, right? So how do I actually completely transform myself away from that kind of thinking and only focus on high value human interaction versus low value human interaction, right? I think clearly one thing I can clearly say is that remote education has fundamentally failed. It has not worked. I don't think, my blunt opinion, nobody has learned anything in the last 1 year in a traditional formal setting. If they have self-directed and they have used their own sort of source of content and so on, they've done that. I don't think kids have particularly had a hard time. My son is 8 years old, and I in general, virtual education has not scaled or delivered from a junior school standpoint. I guess senior schools, I mean, the jury is a little bit out and so on. For self-directed college students, perhaps, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's fine. But for small kids for whom social interaction is absolutely important, this has been a huge disaster in that sense. But clearly also means that the fundamental rethinking of what education experiences really are, beyond just simply staring at a screen. How do I actually deliver, say, personalized, gamified experiences, right? So I think the innovation as we go forward, technologically, I think things like virtual reality and so on will help create more immersive, more perhaps AI-driven ways in which I can understand what the level of the person and then be able to tailor it, which is exactly what a teacher does in a good school with a good student-to-teacher ratio. What might happen in a fine university and a fine, etc., where a small number of students and very, very good teachers and so on. But in the vast, larger scale, the current generation of technology is overpromised and underdelivered. And I think there's tremendous amounts of improvement that need to happen. So the other thing that we are recognizing is the fact that so in workplaces, the best workplaces have not just hierarchies, which are teams, right? So there's accountability, there's budgets, there are deadlines, carrot and stick, and so on. But also have tribes and clans. Tribes are essentially people with the same skills across the organization who are able to form a community of practice, right? Meaning that I am a large company, right? And I have people who are working on artificial intelligence everywhere, okay? So all of those guys working on multiple things are still able to form a community of practice and be able to share things, etc. And sometimes these communities of practice extend outside of organizations, particularly in technology. This is true, right? The second sort of structure is clans. Clans are essentially people with different skills who are incentivized to kind of come together and are able to work on projects that are just outside of the traditional thing that the organization does. So a lot of very innovative companies, if you will, have a lot of clans, essentially people who are able to form structures outside of the formal structures that are there in the workplace, right? So now one of the challenges obviously is that in many situations in large companies, barring tribes, clans and teams ended up being co-located for the most part, because innovation really works when people whiteboard, see each other, bounce ideas of each other, and so on. Very limited if they were remote and so on, right? But I think the last 1 year has essentially meant that companies needed to really think about how innovation can happen through this kind of medium, right? And that's really hard, right? So, but what technology is good at is that you can now create and foster and make people be part of multiple clans, right? So the tech design of collaboration technology is such, like, for example, I think, tools like Slack and other things often allow you to randomly meet 3 people in your company and have a chat with them. Maybe some great ideas come, right? So technology can intervene. So for example, in TCS, we randomly take people who have completed 1 year at TCS, and a bot actually auto finds a mentor and connects both of them and says, hey, just chat, right? And so on. So things like this, right? So this is just sort of one of those things. What it means is that there is now an opportunity to really think about using data to design people networks to maximize the cognitive surplus that you have, because you will have people who are interdisciplinary. The more and more people you have who are interdisciplinary, that they are better off being not just part of teams, but also part of clans, right? So this is one thing, right? So this therefore means that you have to fundamentally think how you can work in an agile manner, regardless of where you are. In a world where agile ways of working only worked when you were co-located, right? So essentially means that asking 3 questions. What's the distribution of business knowledge, right? How volatile are requirements for this program or project, right? And you have a common set of understanding tools and so on. Based on those things, you can either be, you have to be entirely local. I'll give you an example, okay? So if you're a retail company and you have a branch in one city somewhere in the US, and there's a team that has to look at data and has to do a small little bit of an IT project to decide what items get discount, what items need to be prominently featured at the front of the store. And so this is a task that they do on a daily basis, right? This uses a lot of data, but it also uses a lot of local cultural understanding. It's not encoded in data, right? So there's a football game happening locally. So a lot of people are likely to come over. So maybe we should put the beer up front, or, Coca-Cola, chips and so on, right? So they do those kinds of things, right? Now, is this the sort of thing that you can do in a fully distributed manner with some kids in India who have no cultural understanding of St. Louis's, football teams? Not going to happen, right? Meaning that the way you divide work now also to take into understand these 3 dimensions and then decide whether some piece of work has to be local, minimally distributed where you do the bulk and somebody somewhere else is just continuing what you do, significantly distributed where independent pieces of work can happen in independent places, and fully distributed where each of those nodes can further distributed across time zones, right? Now, one example of the retail example, an example of fully distributed is payment systems. Okay? Payment systems, processing, etc., regardless of where you are in the world, very, very similar. Meaning that largely the same engineering, multiple engineering teams can all work on it. The general mechanics of how they work are all largely the same. So you can be fully distributed and so on. So it therefore means that it's about building a distributed business knowledge, better, more unique time zone planning. And the other element now is location planning, right? So in hybrid organizations, now companies have to think about when are people going to be co-located. So I have this A and B who work only Monday, Tuesdays in the office, and for the rest of the day, they are working at home. Okay? And C and D actually work only Thursdays and Fridays. And how do I actually bring them together? So this is another kind of coordination problem that companies will need to start kind of dealing with, right? So new ways of dividing work and so on. So the other sort of important element is all of this is fine, and it doesn't make any sense if you only have people who are deep specialists and not interdisciplinary people who can forever kind of step outside just the comfort areas of their skills and become generalists, right? So, and by generalist, I don't mean somebody with a shallow knowledge. A generalist is a specialist with also width. So width is what we call the T factor, meaning that you have a core skill, you also have adjacent skills, and you also understand innovation, disruption in your area. You understand the impact. You understand both strategy and operations, but also understand the impact of automation. And you understand fundamentals of design thinking, agile ways of working, and so on. And you understand digital technologies at their foundation level. This is sort of like a broad sense of the modern employee, if you will, in the sort of post-COVID era, is that at the intersection of business technology and operations, right? So briefly, what I'll talk about is just give me 1 second. It looks like some Amazon guys trying to reach me. Just 1 second. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, there was just nobody. Sorry, there was nobody at home, and there was some 16 missed calls from some Amazon delivery guy. Anyway, so that's the world we live in. Okay. So what I wanted to kind of talk about, give me 1 second. So one is that, what is TCS thinking about this for its own stuff, right? One is that we've boldly sort of dedicated to saying that what we've discovered is that the nature of how we work, at least at the junior developer level, they can be significantly productive even if they only spend about 25% of their time in the office. and up to 75% could actually happen, remotely, right? Now, this is by no means a hard number. And again, this is not, so there will be phases of work when I think everyone needs to co-locate in the context of a project. And there are phases of work where I think you're better off individually being productive. Because what we discovered is that people are more productive individually for certain kinds of tasks. But collaborative creativity requires you to be co-located and so on, and team building and relationship building and so on. Now, there may be roles where you need to spend a lot more time. Designers, we expect, will spend almost 75% of their time in an office because their primary job requires to empathize, them to empathize and meet with people and so on, right? So many other, obviously, challenges to this, obviously, in addition to the secure on-demand connectivity, etc. Interesting ethical dilemma questions about governance and monitoring, right? In the physical office, a guy swipes a card, guy swipes out a card. Notionally, I have some third party being able to audit and say that, yeah, this guy came to office and left the office at this point, right? How do you do proof of work if people are sitting at home, right? Do you monitor when they log in and when they logged off? Well, we work sometimes. My first email I check at 6 a.m. and then my last email I check at say 11 p.m. Does that mean that I'm actually working all this while? How do you? So the problem is that, and a lot of this kind of governance actually ends up sounding very creepy. So I think the larger change is this cultural shift from presenteeism to outcomes, meaning that I actually don't care about proof of working. I need proof of work. Right? So this is a big change, and this is the single biggest change management because supervisors have historically always managed to supervise working, not work. They kind of look at their style of management is they have the team, they know who's working, they know who's productive, they know who's having problems, who needs to learn, and so on. They know who the expert is, and that's essentially how low-level management has always happened. None of those skills translate very well to the remote world because you can't see the other person, you don't know what problems they're having, and so on. And so managers sometimes overcompensate, right? So let me set up a status meeting every day. Okay? Let me set up, and every manager. So, for example, managers attend status meetings of their direct reports and their direct reports. So everybody's part of status meetings all the time. Okay? So all of this essentially means a cultural change where you have to really change the way you think about management, and that is the single biggest thing. It's not technology. I mean, we'll all start using video conferencing and all these other tools pretty easily. Okay, changing the culture of leadership, culture of mid-level leadership is the hardest thing. Senior leaders, relatively still simple because they've always been doing remote management. The very definition of a senior leader is that he's probably in the head office. And if you're a global or a national company, by definition, you're always doing remote leadership. It's just that now the rest of the organization is doing it and it's happening at scale, right? The other element, we also believe that being borderless, right? You now have access to borderless talent, meaning that, see, I spoke about how we switched to an entrance test. The other thing now is that, well, do I need this person working in Indore, or sorry, working in, say, a small town in Tamil Nadu to move to Chennai or Bangalore? Not really. The guy can work from wherever that person is, right? So I now therefore have a larger opportunity to de-urbanize, meaning that I can still have a sizable workforce that I can hire anywhere, and that person doesn't have to come and live in a tiny 1 BHK, sharing it with 5 people in Bangalore or Mumbai and so on. This presents another opportunity. And the fact that you have a flexible sort of outcome-driven work culture means that definitely it'll improve diversity. So, this time, so 52% of the people we hired this year were women, right? Meaning that you have more flexible work styles, you'll improve diversity. And diversity, again, has been shown to result in better outcomes. And again, this has been a good outcome in that sense. And not to mention the obvious carbon footprint of all the buses and the number of people having to travel to our TCS offices for 2 hours outside the city and so on. All those are there. These are the positives, right? The negatives obviously is that it's nearly impossible to instill a sense of value system or culture because human beings are architectural beings. We build temples, we build pyramids, we build giant structures, we build offices that themselves imbue meaning. They imbue a sense of attachment. They imbue a sense of corporate culture. Right? If your office is drab and gray and boring, your culture is drab and gray and boring. If your office is vibrant and interesting, then your culture is that too. So we are architectural beings as well. And so therefore, we absolutely understand that people do need an attachment to a physical office. Whether it's a giant office 2 hours away or a smaller, more nimble, agile office closer to where you live is something that we'll kind of see. But definitely, so clearly, I think people do need that kind of attachment to create that kind of corporate culture and awareness and so on. The other thing is that productivity improves and cost of collaboration is very high. Okay. So especially when it comes to making decisions. So we're not good at seeing each other in these tiny screens and make very critical decisions, getting the full confidence that everybody is in on it, right? And sometimes people may not turn on their video, and so on. And it's very, very hard. And many of these things kind of add up in how you make decisions, and whether you're a low trust organization or a high trust kind of organization, and so on. Employee engagement is really, really hard, right? We kind of bring celebrities, and we get Rahul Dravid to come and do an interview, Vishwanathan Anand to come and teach chess, and some celebrity chef to come and teach cooking every other day on our internal sort of engagement thing. But it's not quite the same thing, right? Because human beings essentially engage with each other by having coffee at the office coffee shop, right? It's not, this is, no matter what you do here, it's not quite the same thing, right? And that is somehow missing. Creativity, significantly, what we found is that the number of meeting hours for developers went up. The number of meeting hours for designers actually went down, because designers apparently don't like doing meetings. They actually want to see people in person, so they decline meetings. Developers are now forced to keep giving status to their supervisors, and they're just in meetings sometimes up to 30 hours a week, out of a 45-hour work week, right? And so in this sense, all of this essentially mean that the new workplace definitely is going to be hybrid. It has to be flexible. It has to encompass every aspect of the infrastructure, the workplace, change management and adoption, right? Remote culture awareness, right? Can I also use technology to nudge you? For example, if I attend meetings for 2 hours, there's a small bot that in TCS will tell me to go relax my eyes, take a break for 10 minutes, and so on. Can I do wellness nudging, right? Can I continuously have two-way engagement with employees? Can I fundamentally improve your what you call T factor, meaning depth of knowledge and width of knowledge? Can I redefine work? Can I redefine how governance actually happens? How do I actually get proof of work? I have to reimagine what security means now, because there are so many threat surfaces and people working on the edges, right? I have to be far, far more behavior science and data and evidence driven, not the gut feel HR sort of mindset that used to pervade the older, all built on a foundation of wellness, where the company now has to be worried about purposeful time spent. Do you feel you find meaning in your work? How's your health and safety, time with family and kids? Your sort of, how's your work-life continuum actually working out? Are you sitting in a comfortable chair? Or are you getting back problems and so on, and so on. So this again, very, very data driven, right? So all of this essentially means that there's more to this, right? So there is, can I reduce the friction? Can I bring all of my applications into my collaboration tool so you don't have to context switch, right? So, like WhatsApp introduced payments, meaning, I'm already chatting with people on WhatsApp. Now I can pay them also. So sort of like that. Can I get a single pane of glass where I'm always in Zoom or I'm always in a chat window, bring everything there, right? Flexible working will be the new normal, meaning that I don't think we will see it oddly when people decide that they will work 3 days from home and 2 days in the office, post-pandemic and so on, right? There will be more teams with more remote workers. So you'll have to fundamentally rethink how you do time zone planning, how you do task planning and so on very differently now, right? This entire office spaces themselves will need to be radically reimagined, right? So office spaces may not be for individual productivity anymore, but they'll actually be for more collaborative meeting spaces. See, when we were all in the office, the most scarce commodity was meeting rooms, okay, right? We ended up having too many useless meetings and there were not enough meeting rooms. And now those in-person meetings are high value, right? So we need to have more of that and less of individual cubicle space, because that you can do at home and so on, right? More investments and obviously artificial intelligence that augments what you do, better search, better context awareness, and so on, right? Transformation of how you hire, onboard, virtually, digitally onboard employees, integrate them into the team, and also how do you improve their sort of T factor, which is what I talk about, right? So at the end of the day, the final slide is about saying that the future of the workplace is hybrid, personalized, and very digitally nudged, right? And fundamentally has to do with reducing 4 costs. It has to reduce the cost of productivity. That's the elephant in the room, right? You have to reduce the total paid minutes that prevent employees from getting things done. Everything from basic IT services, HR, all of these things ultimately today prevent you from working. So so you have to reduce that. Okay. Then you have to think one level above and say, okay, that's individualist cost of productivity. Cost of coordination happens when you only have people in silos working who are highly specialized and with a legacy collaboration culture where they are not constantly sharing, working out loud. All you do is more meetings, less work. It takes a longer time to make decisions, especially in globally distributed teams. So you have to change the culture of collaboration in order to fix this. It's not a technology problem, right? So yes, you have to move away from email and use more chat, collaborative Slack or Teams like tools, but it also means a cultural change. The third level is much, much harder, a lot more culture. Cost of agility is if you only have people with I-shaped skills and you're taking a long time to onboard people into the culture and value system of the company, and you don't have an agile decision culture. Agile essentially means that at the simplest level, it is that in the traditional non-agile world, scope, unless you have clarity on scope, you don't agree to deadline. That's the old world. The new world is deadline is sacrosanct. You can keep renegotiating scope till you arrive at an MVP that you can deliver by that deadline. Okay. So that's agile as a culture. That's a cultural change that's really, really hard to do. All that ultimately adds up to an organization that needs to be perpetually in a state of transformation, right? Where everyone has to wake up and say, my job could be automated, I could be obsolete, the product that I'm building could be obsolete. And so therefore, what can I continuously do to push the envelope, right? To create an organization like that at scale requires you to first address a lot of this. And most companies are in varying stages of addressing the first few problems before they even get to, cost of innovation and so on. So that, in a sense, is my sort of very high-speed summary, if you will, of the sorts of things we are thinking about. I mean, we could keep talking about this for us, but maybe we can do some Q&A now.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was very interesting talk. And in fact, it ignites a lot of new questions. I have a few, but I'll wait for others to raise theirs. So the floor is open now. You can raise your hand or just type in the chat box if you have questions or you want to discuss something with Chris.
Vivek has a question.
Hi, Vivek. Yeah. Can you be a bit louder?
Right. Is this better?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Krish. This is Vivek. I'm currently a assistant professor at IIT Delhi. This is a great talk. I so a lot of ideas that I thought were sort of mentioned. But to me, I think from my sort of anecdotal experience of most of my colleagues, cousins, etc., was that work from home has been a really tedious sort of shift. And I think you sort of also talked about this, about the blurring work-life balance becoming a continuum and so on and so forth. And so in that sense, just wanted to understand what are the checks and balances, for instance, that TCS has already thought of or is in the process of implementing. Just your input.
So I think clearly, I think as at the end of the day, flexible work essentially means that you have to be smart about not bringing the most tedious bits home. And that over time, I think there'll be a growing recognition of the sorts of things that are better done in person. And I think a lot of meetings, in-person interactions and so on, collaborative creativity and those kinds of decision-making things will happen. Whereas so that the work that you end up doing at home as a result of either your own choice or maybe because of company's policy and so on, will be the kinds of things that you are uniquely placed to do with the right kind of ergonomic home office setup, which is something that we are investing in, the right kind of hardware and connectivity as well. That you can do it successfully, reasonably, flexibly, right, and not in a time-sensitive manner. Meaning that the sorts of things you do at home have to be the sorts of things where you can put pause, go deal with your child, and then come back. See, today the problem is it gets tedious because you're sitting in meetings and then you can't just leave the meeting and go and attend to your child, and then then your spouse is you have conflicting meetings, and the child is running around, and so all those kinds of things add to that stress, right? So I think the growing recognition of first figuring out, if you are going to be working remotely, what kind of work will you do that is less stressful and that is suitably designed for your conditions is going to be important, right? And this may vary. Actually, there may be people who are just living by themselves and are able to do a wider range of things without stress, versus people for whom that empathy might be required. So this is, I think, clearly one way of thinking about it. Um, but I suspect that this will undergo some constant changes. I don't think we have nailed it yet. So I suspect that, I think as we kind of get out of the pandemic, as we vaccinate everyone and so on, the first instinct will be for as many people to come back to the physical workplace as possible. But with this growing recognition that, look, within your teams, within your projects, work out what works for you. It's possible that you may need to be 5 days in the office because that's the nature of work you do, and your customer is like that, and you're forced to do that. Another team might essentially therefore say that, no, you know what, I think we can do this smartly. No, why don't you work 2 days from home, and we can do this remotely, right? I think if I had to say one big change is to simply not have one single HR policy for everyone, but really allow 1,000 flowers to bloom as we kind of head back to the workplace and arrive at the right balance, right? In terms of what you can best do at home and versus what you can best do in the office and so on.
But isn't that the risk in the sense that, I mean, I think what you're basically saying is decentralization or something of that sort,
Yep.
but that
Yes.
simply means lesser checks and balances. I mean, and that's
well, checks and balances. It depends on where you put the locus of control at the end of the day. So it's not about less checks and balances. See, so today I can actually argue that the locus of control should have actually been at the project team level, but it is actually sitting somewhere in Bombay. That was not a good idea at all. Right. So it is, therefore, if anything, we've now recognized where you need to place that locus of control at decision-making authority. So it's not about, so definitely checks and balances happen at the, say, a project as a unit. If I take that as a unit, right? A project is fully accountable for delivering what it needs to deliver to the customer and bring in that revenue. They make the HR choices they make to do the work that they do, should have always been the strategy, is what I would argue.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. So Vivek is assistant professor at IIT Delhi. Do we have
Yeah, Arindam.
Arindam? Yeah, Arindam, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Krish. Thanks for the talk. I had one question. So just adding to what Vivek also mentioned previously. So over the year and a half, as we have gone into the pandemic, we've seen a lot of organizations struggling to understand the physical and mental well-being of the employees. You also, made the point where workplace is not it's not about balance, it's about a continuum. So could you just share some of the practices from a TCS perspective of what they have done or what you're doing on the ensuring the physical and emotional well-being of the employees during this time?
So tactical, simple things include things like having a professional yoga and other people being available on demand on video in groups and all that. People can log in the morning and collectively do yoga and those kinds. So those are tactical, small things, etc. Doctors being available, greater pool of psychologists, psychiatrists, and people who are therapists being available for you to talk about stress. And obviously people dealing with, say, COVID deaths and COVID crises in their own family, needing to get therapy. The recognition that mental health is important. So these are some of the more tactical, immediate things. A couple of more interesting, broader structural things that we did using data. One is to really use data to drive down the length of meetings. And we started sort of making default meetings to be 15 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes. And creating Teams meeting templates so that, if you're in a status meeting, your whatever it is you need to get status from, either a ticketing system and all that, already pre-integrated, so that for the most part, you don't need to have a daily status meeting, because if data is visible to everyone, then you don't need to have a meeting just to get status, because status is visible in real time, right? So take these kinds of design changes to actually just reduce the number of times that you people had to sort of get into a meeting to discuss something, right? At least these kinds of things. So therefore, thereby increasing the number of one-on-one connects, we nudged a lot of supervisors, because we found a correlation between managers who reached out one-on-one to their direct reports, even if it is just via chat. Okay, their teams reported less attrition, less amounts of stress, and higher productivity. the teams that did not happen. So we were able to then say, why don't you literally have to train people to say, coach, once a day, say literally, right? You have to tell people to do that. So there's a lot of stuff that will seem very silly, but you have to be intentional about it because nothing is natural about working remotely. Everything that you took for granted as a basic human skill in the physical workplace has to be intentionally ritualized for the virtual world. So this is one, right? The other element is about looking at information flow patterns and finding out which kind of teams had more healthier collaboration patterns. And this is not just surveillance of actual content, but really just metadata related to what information graphs, how was information flowing, were there people who were disconnected versus others, and what kind of collaboration patterns suggested a happier, a more productive team and happier teams and so on. So that was another way of looking at it. The other one is also look at after hours, like, so for example, what is the, in this unit and this project, what's the total number of hours being spent after 6 p.m. in responding to emails and in attending meetings after 6 p.m., right? And then look at those kind of hours and see whether that correlates with stress and seeing if there has to be any targeted intervention in spotting overwork a little ahead of time, right? Are there individuals who are being overworked, attending upwards of almost like 35 hours in meetings, and many of the hours are actually after 6 p.m. And so on. So those kinds of things that we started looking at the data and so on. Then obviously digital nudges that started looking at things like, you've been in a meeting for 2 hours, can you just go wash your eyes, relax. So wellness nudges, just roll your shoulders, and so those kinds of things. And now we're increasingly moving to the point where users then configure when they want to get these nudges as a way of habit forming and so on. But last but not the least, I think it was a complete restructuring of how we thought about human resources. That this is the time when I think that role had to move away from being a transactional player of enabling hiring and doing some sort of checklist related digital work, to essentially reaching out to individuals. Things like arranging for, in some cases, arranging for oxygen, they had to arrange for hospital beds and all that. So their role radically transformed into a role that now had to look at data and then do targeted interventions because their bandwidth was smaller. And so this was actually the time when HR became a lot more data driven. And as a result of which, I think there's an opportunity for them to actually be high value as we kind of go forward. So this is just some of the things in addition to other of the normal related things with regard to obviously helping our associates get vaccinated. We arrange for vaccination things for the entire family in our offices where people will bring their families, get vaccinated and so on. In addition to also enabling on-demand doctors and others to be available for any kind of consultation. I think there are still some gaps related to how we deal with the fact that schools are still closed and that a lot of our employees are young and many of them have young children. And if they're not getting back to school, the home will still be a very stressful place to work. As long as kids are at home, it's always going to be stressful. Okay. It's just that we assume that the stress didn't exist because we used to work and a poor lady in the house had to deal with that stress. But now every one of us has to deal with that stress, and so now we are wanting to take action on it anyway. So that's where we are.
So Chris, it's already 6, but are you okay with taking a couple of more?
Sure.
Okay. So do we have anybody else there? Question? Okay. So in that case, let me ask one. So Chris, workspaces, and you can accuse me of thinking analogously between the traditional workplace and the reimagined. But if I may still, workplaces are more than a desk and an assembly line, right? There are rituals and there are physical markers of status, belonging,
yes, yes,
and also identity. So you have a cubicle, you put little artifacts there which says that this is Chris's desk. Maybe you would have a guitar there, I don't know. Yep. So so it's a place yes. of bringing your identity also there. Now yes. In this new reimagined workplaces that we are thinking about, are these things passe, or or there would be new markers for new physical markers for status, belonging, identity, or we simply forgo them in this bargain?
It's actually a great question. So the way I've been thinking about this is the fact that some of the things that we associate with the physical workplace, things such as the things we keep in our table, the fact that we have our own space, our own cubicle, cabin, if you're senior and so on, dedicated parking spots, for your car and so on. So in the way I see it is that there are some of the unseen bad implicit effects of that physical workplace culture are somehow better off in the virtual world, right? In the sense that in the Zoom world, nobody knows that, say, you're vice president and I'm junior. Okay? They're all the same. We see the same pixels. It all looks the same, right? And with the fact that we can now have filters to hide our background, right? So I can always simply put a virtual background, and all of a sudden, you don't see the fact that I have a messy room, right? Or that I have a posh room. So you can signal. So people can signal other things by putting art behind and all of that. But at the end of the day, there's a very curious democratization that is possible in the workplace, which in the virtual way of working, which if anything is worth thinking about retaining as we kind of head back to the physical workplace, right? So in this world, whether I sit in a cabin, whether I sit in so there are none of those status of hierarchy that are visible, and in that sense, that's actually a good thing. Okay. The other elements of the physical workplace that I think are worth not going back to is the physical workplace is a place of implicit, unrecognized bias. Okay. The people who come to a physical workplace are pre-selected from certain aspects of society. They're probably urban. They're probably English educated. They are probably from only some communities, some castes and so on. They're probably male, less likely to be women. So all of these biases pre-filter before you get someone in the workplace. And once you're in the workplace, other markers come, right? So your status, you're in a cabin, you're in a small cubicle, you're in a corner office, and if you're in a culture like Japan, in a meeting room, based where each one sits is also a marker of hierarchy. So the senior most guy sits in that one corner seat, and then the others sit, and they wait for that person to sit before the other person sit, and so on. Each of these kinds of things, if you will, are in some sense dispensed with in this world, and that's not altogether a bad thing, right? So if I tell you this, as we get back to the physical workplace, I for one will tell my team that, okay, no more physical interviews of people face to face. Please only do virtual interviews, not on video, only audio. You know what? Actually, we're working with a startup that will muffle the audio so you won't know whether it's a boy or a girl. Okay. So because I truly believe that we are seeing a drastic reduction in implicit biases in hiring the moment you do it this way. Okay. So therefore, I don't want the bias of having the person is physically disabled, he come up to your interview. Again, if the person is tall, you're going to be more biased towards MVPs. Fair skin, you're going to be. So all of these are implicit biases that we sometimes have no control over. And so in that sense, I think there are rituals of the physical workplace that I think are worth bringing into the physical workplace, related to how we empathize, related to how we help each other, related to how we have ambient awareness of what's going on, ambient awareness of corporate culture, value systems, and so on. Those are worth bringing in, right? But we have to learn and recognize what are the worst things of the physical workplace that I do not want to go back to, and then appropriately use what we've learned by working remotely to get rid of those kinds of things.
Thank you. So if I can squeeze one quick one.
Sure.
So there are two kinds of work that this digital workplace has done very well, actually, rather. One is the automation part, which is the repetitive and the algorithmic decision making. And interestingly, on the other extreme is the creative, collaborative, crowdsourcing of ideas thing. So these are two extremes. One is the repetitive part, the other one is highly creative part. At these two extreme or very well known use cases, if you may call it,
Yes.
this technology has done very well. what remains to be seen is what there is a wide range in between these two extremes, right? Like, for example, mentoring, uh,
Yes.
uh, learning by observation. So you look over somebody's shoulder and learn. So these aspects of organizations are, I guess, yet to be addressed by technology.
Absolutely. And I suspect that some of them will be very difficult to address because I think some of them end up being very intrinsically human things that happen when human beings are next to each other. And although, for example, I think, there is one of my team that is responsible for looking at really futuristic ways of doing this, briefly experimented with a virtual reality headset during the pandemic that allows you, that places you in a physical office that kind of resembles our physical office and so on. And at this point, the technology is at the point where you don't see like a physical three-dimensional representation of the other person, but it's like an avatar, right? Animated avatar, right? But you can have full voice and so on. And the team said that it clearly feels better than watching two-dimensional video conferencing on a flat screen. It feels a little bit more immersive, etc. Not quite as good as actually meeting people in real life, but it somehow seems to be better. So there will be, I think, incremental improvements in the immersion technologies that will make virtual experiences slightly better than they are today, right? But they won't quite approach, actual human interaction and so on, right? See, and the use cases that you spoke about, right? So, for example, a lot of sometimes what companies fail to do is recognize what is high value impact of automation. Like, for example, we've done so much automation across TCS. But if you ask people what's the one thing that they remember, they'll remember one thing, which is automation that auto approves claims. Okay, so you make a claim, you spend on something, sales meeting, whatever it is, travel, and you put a claim. So we switched to a model where your supervisor and his manager had to approve. Then it goes to finance. Finance has to approve. After that, you have to send your bills. They will check the bills, and then finally they will clear, and then it will get credited. If all of this happens before the 15th of the month, you will get it credited that month. Otherwise, next month. So your payroll and all of that, right? So that was the process. So we switched to a model where we wrote an algorithm that looked at patterns and said 95% of these don't need approvals. Okay, because I think we can just straight through approve them and not worry about them at all. Okay? Just approve them, and within 24 hours, settle the money, send the money directly. Okay, and then have an algorithm that randomly picks samples to see whether there's any fraud or any other thing going on, to see any other patterns, and also have patterns. Like, for example, if it's a $20 cab fare, just approve it, right? Because it's there's nothing to it, and the person traveled to the US, etc. If it's a $400 cab fare, flag it and don't auto approve it. I mean, it's basically go after the exceptions as opposed to try to do the human process for everything. So this was an example of automation that I think made such a material difference, because at the end of the day, the experience of you putting a claim and getting your money in 24 hours is phenomenal. Okay. That more than anything else, we've done all kinds of automation. Nobody remembers those things, but this everyone remembers, right? So sometimes I think what happens is it's about investing in the automation that has the highest impact, and that I feel is where we are lacking in that the design and the human aspects of designing automation is often very poorly understood by engineers, because engineers like to automate everything they see. Okay? Prioritization of which one has the most human impact is not a very engineering skill. That's a humanity skill. And I think more designers, more people with humanity skills is really who will figure out all the in-between use cases for them to succeed. We will need more of these kinds of thinking.
Yeah. So that was a very wonderful talk today, Chris. So unless you have something for us to ask, we can call it a day.
Thank you. And so very briefly, I think this is obviously my book.
Yeah. Forgot to talk about Masala Labs. Yeah.
Anyway, no, this is The Science of Indian Cooking. It's available on Amazon. It's so it's essentially it was essentially me sort of saying that a lot of Indian cooking is written as if it's something artistic. It's a great history, tradition. All of that is fine, right? But at the end of the day, somebody has to cut vegetables, somebody has to cook the rice so that it doesn't overcook, somebody has to make sure that the temperature of the oil is in a range so that it doesn't burn things. All of this is a craft, and this craft requires precise documentation, right? Recipes don't tell you that the oil has to be between 175 and 180 Celsius for you to get the perfect puri. Okay, they just tell you, oh, oil has to be hot enough, or there's some. So basically, I found that nobody's actually ended up writing, explaining the science of what we do. So this is not to teach you a new way of cooking. It's to say these are all the things your grandmothers do, but here's why they do it. Okay. They may not be able to explain the science, but I can explain in first principles exactly what's happening, the thermodynamics, the physics, and the basics chemistry. If you know this, now you can be more confident. You don't have to rely on recipes. You can then think in terms of metamodels. You can think in terms. So that's the entire premise of the book. So on that note, thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this book, and all the best with that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Great talk. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.